Piers Morgan recently had a panel on his show debating two questions. Why does Israel get a pass on nuclear transparency? Everyone knows Israel has a nuclear program, but they don't officially say they have a program, and the United States doesn't officially acknowledge that Israel has a nuclear program. Like, why does Israel get a pass on transparency when Iran doesn't? And the other question that was dealt with in this clip is the question of, is the IDF really the most moral army in the world? I'm not going to play you the whole conversation. I'm just going to play you a few short clips from it. The guests on the panel with Piers Morgan were Scott Horton, Jonathan Sacerdoti, I think I said his name right, and Colonel Bob Stewart. And look, it's actually a decent conversation, better than most, but there are these two moments where the panel either gets it wrong or just stops short of the real answer, and there's a lack of accurate information and context. So I want to fill in those gaps because the arguments that no one is making on this panel are actually the strongest ones, and I want you to know them. So let's go ahead. Here is, let's go over to clip one. We'll make this a little bit bigger. And clip one, here we go.
Why should Iran have to be completely transparent about its own nuclear aspirations?
Because it is a regime which wishes to kill us.
Well, okay, that's your opinion.
It's their opinion. They say it.
But there are other
to America.
There are other countries.
To Israel, okay. The great Satan, the little Satan.
But there are other countries. But if you go to Russia or China or North Korea, vast swathes of the world don't agree with you, right? So the point being,
what do you mean they don't agree that those are facts? That Iran says death to Israel and death to America?
No, I didn't say that.
Has launched.
I mean, they are supportive of the regime that you detest, right? So my point being that there are globally.
Okay, but they're
hang on, Jonathan.
Right.
Hang on. This is your opinion.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
Well, that's what I'm.
That's fine. I'm saying they're
uncensored.
Of course. No, of course. Well, my point being, a lot of the world has a different opinion about Iran.
Sure, they do,
right?
But I'm
so my question. The point of my question. No,
yeah.
but the point of my question: why should we be compelling Iran to be transparent about what it has?
Because if they have a nuclear weapon.
But why is Israel not compelled to be as transparent?
Because Iran signed the NPT and Israel didn't. That's why. Iran is actually obligated.
Okay, Iran is. That's correct. Iran is obligated, and Israel isn't.
Would it not be a powerful thing for Israel to say, in full transparency,
I don't know.
We have 170 nukes?
Maybe it would. Maybe it wouldn't.
Okay. Let's unpack what we just saw there. So Jonathan is right on the legal point. Iran signed the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and Israel did not, or the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, whatever it's called. So Iran is bound by it and Israel isn't. That is accurate, but no one on this panel is asking the more important question. Why did Israel make that choice, and is it a rational one? And this issue of Israel's lack of transparency on their nuclear program, I've seen it come up in the media a fair amount lately, especially since this whole Iran thing has been front and center. And I want to give it some context that I have not seen anyone else give it. Like, why does Israel get a pass? So here's some background numbers. Between 2015 and 2024, the United Nations General Assembly passed 173 resolutions condemning Israel. Now, against every other country in the world combined, 80, so less than half. And the United Nations Human Rights Council has passed 112 resolutions condemning Israel during that time. Iran, which signed the NPT and is openly violating it, Iran, one of the worst abusers of human rights in the world, has received 16 condemnations from the United Nations Human Rights Council. Again, Israel received 112, Iran 16, Russia, that's no picnic for human rights, 11, Syria, where hundreds of thousands of people were slaughtered, 45. Add them all up and they still don't come close to Israel's number. Okay, it's so ridiculous. Now, what does this have to do with not signing the NPT? I'll get to that in a moment. It gets worse, though. Right now, Iran sits as vice chair of the United Nations Commission for Social Development, the body whose stated mission is promoting democracy and women's rights. Women's rights. This is days after, or weeks after, not long ago, they gunned down thousands of their own citizens in the streets. The International Criminal Court famously issued arrest warrants for Israeli leaders for war crimes, for genocide, for defending their country from a terrorist massacre, before they issued any warrants for Hamas commanders who planned October 7th. Now, what does all this have to do with the NPT? So my point is, Israel knows very well that the international legal bodies, the UN, the International Criminal Court, the United Nations Human Rights Council, all of these organizations are just nakedly anti-Israel. They are so biased against Israel, it's absurd. I mean, look at those numbers on the condemnations in the Human Rights Council. Think of the human rights abusers in the world who get a pass. And Israel's constantly demonized by all of these international bodies. There was the whole starvation hoax. I wrote a lengthy article for Gatestone Institute about a year ago, uncovering the whole hoax of starvation in Gaza. It's really completely a hoax. So Israel knows this very well, and it was perpetrated by the UN, by the way, and its various appendages. So Israel's not going to submit to the NPT, to the IAEA, which is governed by these same international forces. They're not going to do that. They're not going to submit their national security to international apparatus, to an international apparatus that is so blatantly anti-Israel. They're just not going to do that. So that's the context. It's like, hey, if you want us to sign your agreements, you have to start playing fair. And they don't play fair. So Israel's like, okay, we're not doing that. It's a nation acting in its own self-interest, in its own defense interest against what's obviously a hostile apparatus. Now, here's the part of this conversation that bothers me the most, because it's the part where Piers and Scott Horton treat Iran's nuclear ambitions as though they're just another geopolitical power play. You know, North Korea wants nukes. They have nukes. Pakistan has nukes. They're Muslim. Yeah, but North Korea wants nukes to protect the Kim Jong-un regime. Pakistan wants nukes as a deterrent against India or whatever. Russia has nukes also as a deterrent and kind of as a legacy from their superpower competition, but they have nukes. These are all not good actors, but they're not about to use the nuclear weapons. They have them for deterrence and protection and as leverage. They are rational, if evil and dangerous actors. Iran is not that. The regime in Tehran is run by 12er Shiite Muslims. And if you don't know what that means, you cannot understand anything going on right now. Anything. And they don't even bring it up. 12er Shiite Islam holds that the 12th Imam, the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, is in hiding and will return. He's the Messiah figure, and that he will return to redeem the world and perfect the world, but he will only return when the world is brought to a state of apocalyptic chaos and destruction. That's not my interpretation. That is their theology. That's their eschatology. The way you summon the Mahdi is by maximizing chaos and destruction. This is why Iran funds proxies in every direction simultaneously, and they don't stop building their ballistic missile program and everything else, even though it costs them economically and politically, and the society's collapsing. This is why their people are suffering under sanctions, and they still won't slow down their nuclear and ballistic missile program. Even after the 12-day war, they just poured every cent that they could get back into the weapons. They're not irrational. It's rational within their sick ideological framework. And that sick ideological framework calls for an apocalypse to bring the Mahdi. This is what makes an Iranian nuclear weapon categorically different from a North Korean or Pakistani nuclear weapon, right? Kim Jong-un wants to survive. The mullahs in Tehran want to bring the end of the world. You cannot deter someone with the threat of destruction when destruction is their goal, theologically. Nuclear deterrence, the entire logic that has kept the world safe since 1945, nuclear deterrence assumes that the other side wants to live. And that assumption doesn't hold when you're dealing with 12er Shiite Muslims. Piers never raises this, neither does anyone else on the panel. And without it, the whole why can't Iran have what Israel has argument, which sounds reasonable, isn't. But you have to, every time you have a conversation about this Iran nuclear weapon, you have to bring up the point about the 12er Shiites, the Mahdi, apocalypse. And when Trump says, and Rubio says, if they had a nuclear weapon, they would use it, it's because they understand the ideology of this regime. So when you put it all together from this clip, for this first clip we saw, institutions that have demonstrated systematic and consistent bias against Israel in black and white voting records, combined with a specific threat that is theologically committed to apocalyptic destruction, and Israel's decision to keep its nuclear deterrent outside of international scrutiny is not hypocrisy. It's the only logical conclusion a serious country could reach. You don't hand your survival to referees who've already told you that they're on the other side. And you certainly don't apply Cold War deterrence logic to a 12 or Shiite regime that views nuclear annihilation as the goal. All right, let's go to the second clip. We'll comment on that, and that will be it. Here is clip number 2.
Is it morally defensible to target civilian areas where you know, or you believe, or you suspect terrorists are living and operating? Is that morally defensible?
No, because the Geneva Conventions say to soldiers like myself, you should not unleash weapons if there is a chance that civilians
So,
will
Jonathan,
be killed.
why does the IDF just ride roughshod over that?
Well, my understanding of how the idea from the people I speak to there, how it's operated, for example, in Lebanon, for an awfully long time, they didn't go into Lebanon on a grand operation or do the damage they've just done now. But after Hezbollah joined in on October the 7th or 8th, whenever it was, and Israel evacuated like huge swathes of the north of Israel to create a buffer so that its population would be protected. And indeed, that population's been under threat for some time, with the UNIFIL forces, the UN peacekeeping forces, not keeping peace in the south of Lebanon below the Litani River. So though Israel did tolerate that for an extraordinary amount of time, while its people were under fire for many years, which was very underreported in the West, they did then eventually, after October the 7th, I believe, make a different calculation, which is to say, with warnings to evacuate civilians and an attempt to do those sorts of things, which you're right, don't always work. And you end up often with civilian death counts, which will, be hideous for people to see. But I think they made the evaluation that's a tiny country. Same with the Gaza Strip, which they now hold 50% of in this weird.
Okay, that's enough of that. I want to put the text of the Geneva Convention on the screen right now, because I think that the entire panel here just missed this one. Before we go on, let me remind you about a very important event that's taking place on Wednesday. Israel 365 Action is hosting a webinar, Will America First Stand with Israel, hosted by yours truly. It will be at Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. in Israel. And if you can't make it, sign up anyway, because by signing up, you will then get the full program emailed to you after the fact. So you'll be able to watch it. You won't miss a thing. You just won't catch it live. And we may even be taking some questions from the crowd live. So you definitely want to participate live if you can. But that's 1 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. Will America First Stand with Israel, moderated by myself. And our 3 fantastic panelists are Josh Hammer, senior editor-at-large at Newsweek and host of the Josh Hammer Show on Salem Network, and Dr. David Wormser, senior analyst for Middle East Affairs at the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C. Dr. Wormser also served in multiple U.S. administrations as a senior advisor for the Middle East and the White House, and also served on the National Security Council. He's one of the top Middle East experts in the world and experts on the U.S.-Israel relationship. And Pastor Rob McCoy. Pastor Rob McCoy is the founder of Turning Point USA Faith, and he was Charlie Kirk's pastor. They used to travel together a lot, very close. He was Charlie's really spiritual mentor and a dear friend of mine. And he knows the America First movement intimately, as you could imagine. So the 3 of them are going to join me for this fantastic and important conversation. Will America First Stand with Israel? You can sign up for the webinar by clicking on the link in the description of this video, or by clicking on this QR code here. Click on the QR code, that'll register you for the webinar. So you could pause the video right now, click on the QR code, deal with that. Or again, like I said, there's a link in the description of this video as well. Okay, so like I said, I want to put up the text of the Geneva Convention that they cite here, because this is really, there's like disinformation in this video, because even like that military man in the video was just not citing it accurately. So here we go. This is Article 19 of the Geneva Convention. That's what you're looking at on the screen. Okay, and the entire panel's misreading this, and the misreading of the Geneva Convention, and I've seen it throughout the war since October 7th. There's just like people talk and someone says, well, the Geneva Convention says, and everyone, because they haven't read it either, just sort of nods along. And Jonathan didn't even push back because maybe he hasn't read it. I don't know. But the misreading of the Geneva Convention has cost Israel enormously. So let's read Article 19 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. It says, the protection to which civilian hospitals are entitled, this section's about hospitals, but this is really about civilian locations. We'll get into that more in a bit. The protection to which civilian hospitals are entitled shall not cease, meaning they should always be protected, unless they are used to commit outside their humanitarian duties acts harmful to the enemy. Read that carefully. The protection of a civilian site ceases the moment it's used for military purposes. That's not Israel's interpretation. That is the text of the document that everyone is citing against Israel. But it goes further than Article 19, because the same Geneva Convention, in additional Protocol 1, Article 51, on the protection of civilian population, look what we see here. It states, and this is in point 7 in this. Take a look. This is all about protection of civilian populations in war, and we go down to 7. The presence or movements of the civilian population or individual civilians shall not be used to render certain points or areas immune from military operations, in particular in attempts to shield military objectives from attacks or to shield, favor, or impede military operations. The parties of the conflict shall not direct the movement of the civilian population or individual civilians in order to attempt to shield military objectives from attacks or to shield military operations. This is talking about the human shield strategy. Okay, you're not allowed to do that, which means that when Hamas moves civilians into harm's way, when they put military installations in civilian buildings, in civilian areas, and when they move civilians into those areas in order to prevent an attack, they are the ones responsible for the civilian casualties that result. Now, Article 58 goes even further. It says as follows: the parties to the conflict shall, to the maximum extent feasible, without prejudice to Article 49 of the Fourth Convention, endeavor to remove the civilian population, individual civilians, and civilian objects under the control from the vicinity of military objectives. Instead of moving them into harm's way, you're supposed to actually move them out of harm's way. Avoid locating military objectives within or near densely populated areas. Hamas specifically locates them in densely populated areas, and take the other necessary precautions to protect the civilian population, individual civilians, and civilian objects under their control against the dangers resulting from military operations. This is not just about Gaza, by the way. It's also about Lebanon. Okay, Hamas is obligated. Well, I mean, I don't know if they're party to the Geneva Conventions, but when we're talking about war crimes here, let's be clear what this means in plain language. Under the Geneva Convention, Hamas is legally required to keep its weapons away from hospitals, away. It's legally required to keep its command center away from schools. It's legally required to move civilians away from military targets, not toward them. Every tunnel dug under a residential building, every rocket launcher placed on a rooftop, every command center built inside a mosque, each one of those is not just a military tactic, it's a war crime, a specific, textually prohibited, named war crime under the very document being cited, like in this conversation, against Israel. Now, I want to be precise here because the law is precise and I don't want to oversimplify it. Article 51 also states that Hamas's violations don't entirely eliminate Israel's obligation to take precautions. Both parties carry legal obligations simultaneously. But what that means is that responsibility is shared. And Hamas's share as the party that deliberately embeds its entire military infrastructure inside civilian sites is primary responsibility. It's direct responsibility. They're primarily responsible for the casualties. Yet in every conversation in Western media, including this one on Piers' show, 100% of the moral weight lands on Israel and 0% on Hamas. And that's not what the law says. That's not what the text says. So it's an inversion. It's a reversal of where the primary legal and moral responsibility lies. It's a form of corruption. It rewards the side that is responsible, that uses children as shields, and punishes the side that drops leaflets warning them to leave. You see what's happening here? Yes, every civilian casualty is a tragedy, and it might even be a war crime, but you know whose war crime it is? It's Hamas's war crime. And that's the letter of the Geneva Convention. Everyone cites the Geneva Convention against Israel. They haven't read it. The colonel here is trying to be fair, and I respect that. But when he says that Israel uses Hamas's human shielding as an umbrella excuse, he's getting it backwards. It's not an excuse Israel invented. It's the legal framework the Geneva Convention established for exactly this type of situation. Hamas has built its entire military doctrine around forcing Israel into an impossible choice. Don't strike and allow the attacks to continue, or strike and absorb all the international blame for casualties that Hamas deliberately engineered. And Hamas has said this openly. Their officials have stated proudly that their strategy is to cause maximum civilian death so that Israel gets the blame. That's not an Israeli talking point. That's Hamas in their own words. I mean, let's talk about the casualty numbers. I've talked about them before, but this panel and most of Western media is kind of accepting that there's been this very large amount of civilian casualties. They're accepting it uncritically. And of course, all the figures anyone ever cites come from the Gaza Health Ministry, which is Hamas. That's it. That's the source. The same organization that's party to the conflict, that has every incentive to maximize the reported death toll, and have in every previous conflict with Israel. And here's what those numbers claim. According to Hamas's own health ministry figures, virtually every single person killed in Gaza was a civilian. There's not one combatant identified on their list. And again, this is the Gaza Health Ministry. They are ostensibly recording every single death in Gaza. They have reported 0 combatant deaths. Think about what that means. Gaza is apparently the first war in human history where one side suffered 0 military deaths, and they're all civilian deaths. And then there's the issue of natural deaths, because the Gaza Health Ministry is supposed to also be reporting all natural deaths. And since October 7th, apparently no one has died of natural causes in the Gaza Strip. Every single person who's died in the Gaza Strip is listed as killed by the Israelis. Gaza has become the first society on earth to have abolished natural death. Right? The only way to die in Gaza is from an Israeli strike, apparently. It's not a credible data set. It's propaganda. And what we do know from independent military analysis by the likes of John Spencer, Colonel John Spencer, the chairman of urban warfare studies at West Point, he's the world's leading academic expert on this specific type of warfare. And he's written and stated repeatedly that Israel's done more than any other military in history to minimize civilian casualties. More warning leaflets, more phone calls to civilians before strikes, more targeted operations, more roof knocking. That's the practice of dropping a small non-lethal munition before the actual strike to warn people to evacuate. They do that. No army's ever done this at scale. The US didn't do it in Fallujah. The British didn't do it in Mosul. But Israel did it throughout the Gaza operations. And consider this, in an area of over 2 million people, riddled with over 500 kilometers of tunnels, where every residential building, virtually every one, was found to contain weapons when soldiers entered. Israeli soldiers have said this repeatedly from their own direct experience. The idea that Israel was targeting civilians is just wrong. Again, the Geneva Convention, all the civilian buildings were all turned into military targets. That's the Geneva Convention. We just read it. This is an inversion of reality completely. You don't drop leaflets and make phone calls if you're trying to kill civilians. You do it because you're trying to not kill civilians. The moral failure, if there's any moral failure, it's not Israel's in its conduct of the war. It's the media and the international community that takes Hamas's casualty figures at face value, that ignores the Geneva Convention's actual text on militarized civilian sites. And then it turns the camera on the country that was trying to give people time to evacuate and is adhering to the international law better than anybody. These are just two brief clips of many in this conversation. It was a lot of moments that were worthy of reacting to. But this is just two of them where a lack of context and accuracy just feeds the false narratives about Israel. And I wanted you to be armed with the answers. When people bring up this stuff about civilian casualties, when people bring up this stuff about Israel's nuclear program, now you have the answers. The non-proliferation treaty argument, the nuclear argument, it sounds airtight. Why does Israel get a pass? Until you look at who enforces the NPT. And the numbers show you exactly who that system works for and who it works against. And Israel's not going to submit to it, nor should they. And the Geneva Convention argument gets used constantly against Israel by people who clearly have not read it. And the moment you actually read it, the entire moral framing flips. These aren't obscure arguments. This is not obscure data or documents. It's all public. The legal text is public. The data out of Gaza is public. The job is just to put it together clearly, which is what I'm trying to do on this channel. Anyway, if you found this useful, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you in the next one, and please sign up for that webinar. Here's the QR code again. Will America First stand with Israel? This Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. in Israel, and everything in between. Hope to see you there. God bless.